While my husband was away on a business trip, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law ganged up on me, bashing my head open to steal my grandmother's antique diamond collection and my emergency savings bonds. Suddenly, my husband kicked the door open and roared, "Get the hell out of my house, right now." It was a night of absolute terror. Even now, whenever I close my eyes, I can still smell the metallic scent of my own blood, mixed with the deafening cracks of thunder. All of this happened over my inheritance, the last bit of security my late parents had painstakingly saved to give me. For that, the people who called themselves my family ripped off their masks of morality. They lunged at me, tearing at me, smashing my head just to steal the key to my personal safe. But God was watching. Right at the boundary between life and death, my husband, David, whom I thought was thousands of miles away, appeared like a miracle. He wasn't a pushover. He refused to tolerate evil in the name of family loyalty. That night, he personally threw his own mother and his precious younger brother out into the storm. David's kick to the door initiated the most brutal chain of karmic retribution upon those bloodsuckers. In the end, they lost their generational family home out in the country, tasting the ultimate humiliation reserved for the greedy and malicious. It all started with David's 3-month business trip to London. My husband is a senior software engineer. He is gentle, hardworking, and loves me dearly. Since marrying David, I always told myself I was a lucky woman, no matter how toxic his side of the family was. The cozy townhouse we lived in here in Seattle was bought with our own sweat and tears. We worked day and night and budgeted strictly to afford the mortgage. The day David rolled his suitcase to the airport, he hugged me tightly, his eyes full of reluctance to leave. But the moment he disappeared and our front door closed, the gates of hell truly opened for me. Margaret, my mother-in-law, and Kevin, my lazy, freeloading brother-in-law, moved into my house under the pretense of taking care of Sarah while David was away. In reality, they treated my home as their personal territory, and me as their unpaid maid, a thorn in their side that needed to be removed. Kevin was a gambling addict masquerading as an entrepreneur. He paraded around in designer clothes, constantly boasting about multi-million-dollar crypto and e-commerce projects, but didn't have a dime to his name. Margaret coddled her youngest son blindly, constantly using her authority as an elder to bully me. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. After coming home exhausted from work, I still had to roll up my sleeves, cook, and clean up the war zone, the two of them left in the kitchen. I endured it all, biting my tongue because I didn't want David to worry while he was overseas. I blocked all my complaining texts and only sent him smiling photos. But the patience of a good person is always exploited by the wicked. One weekend afternoon, while I was organizing my closet, Margaret and Kevin suddenly barged into my bedroom. Their eyes gleamed with a bottomless greed. Kevin had sneaked into my room earlier that day and found the velvet lockbox I kept hidden at the bottom of my wardrobe. Inside were authenticity certificates, a collection of my grandmother's vintage diamonds, and $20,000 in savings bonds. Dinner that night turned into a ruthless interrogation. "Sarah, I know you still have those diamonds and bonds," Margaret said. "When a woman gets married, her assets should be pooled to support the family. Kevin has a massive business opportunity right now. He's importing a huge shipment of electronics, but he's short on capital. You're his sister-in-law. Take that inheritance out and let him use it to turn a profit. In a few months, he'll triple the money and give it back to you untouched. I personally guarantee it." "What are you talking about, Margaret?" I replied. "That is my inheritance from my parents. It's my emergency safety net. I am not risking it on a business venture. Furthermore, David isn't home, and I won't make a major financial decision without him. I don't know what Kevin's business is, but I am absolutely not handing over my inheritance. My assets are mine to manage." "Listen to you," Kevin sneered. "You just look down on me because I'm struggling right now, don't you? You're terrified of losing this house, which was bought with my brother's money anyway. You leech off David, and now that you have a chance to help your husband's family with a few rocks and papers, you're being a stingy bitch. Blood is thicker than water. I pay half of this mortgage with my own paycheck," I stated firmly. "That inheritance was given to me by my parents, for me alone. No means no. Don't either of you mention it again. I cleared my dishes and walked upstairs, leaving Margaret cursing loudly behind me. From that day on, I lived in a state of extreme anxiety. I bought a new lock for my bedroom door. Whenever I left for work or went to sleep, I locked it. I kept the tiny key to my lockbox hidden on my person at all times. But greed is a monster with no limits. When people are blinded by money, there is no crime they won't commit. That night, Seattle was battered by a massive Pacific storm. The wind howled, whipping tree branches against the streetlights. Rain lashed against my bedroom window. Thunder roared as if trying to tear the sky apart. I couldn't sleep, a creeping sense of dread gnawed at my mind. The clock struck exactly 2:00 a.m. Click, clack. A sharp metallic sound echoed from my bedroom doorknob. Goosebumps erupted all over my body. They were picking the lock. The twisting of metal in the dark was unmistakable. I sprang out of bed, grabbing my phone to dial 911. But before I could unlock the screen, crash. The door was kicked open. The light from the hallway illuminated two dark silhouettes looming in the doorway. Margaret held a heavy flathead screwdriver, and Kevin gripped a small metal crowbar. Under the flashes of lightning, their faces twisted with horrifying malice. "Did you think changing the lock would stop me? You stubborn little brat," Margaret spat. "Let me tell you something. Kevin's investors are demanding their deposits tomorrow. If he doesn't have the money, he's ruined. If you know what's good for you, open that safe and hand over the inheritance. If you do it quietly, we can still act like family. If not, don't blame me for what happens next. Get out of my room." "Both of you," I yelled. "This is our master bedroom. Breaking in here is a felony. Kevin's business problems are his own. I'm calling David, and I'm calling the cops right now." "Call them." Kevin laughed menacingly. "David's in London, asleep. And even if he picks up, he has to listen to our mother. You think he dare stand up to her? The house is locked tight, and with this storm, no one can hear you scream. Give me the key. Now." Before he even finished his sentence, Kevin lunged at me like a starving animal. He slapped the phone out of my hand, sending it shattering against the wall. I backed away in panic, screaming for help. But the house was too well insulated, and the thunder swallowed my cries. Margaret charged forward. Her fingers, like iron pincers, grabbed my hair, yanking my head back so violently I thought my scalp would tear off. She pinned me down onto the bed while Kevin frantically rummaged through my pajama pockets and my jacket on the chair to find the key. "Let go of me. You're robbing me." "Help!" I shrieked. "Slap her. Shut her up," Margaret commanded. "Search her thoroughly. A woman who hides assets from her own family deserves to be beaten to death." Kevin swung his arm, delivering a brutal slap to my face that made my vision explode with stars. My lips split open instantly, the metallic taste of blood flooding my mouth. The injustice, the sheer terror, and the pain coalesced into a burst of primal survival instinct. I kicked out, my foot connecting squarely with Kevin's stomach, sending him stumbling backward. I violently shoved Margaret's arm off me, scrambled to my feet, and sprinted toward the door. But I underestimated the sheer brutality of that woman. Margaret grabbed the heavy crystal decanter from David's desk. With all her might, she swung it down onto the back of my head. Thud. A sickening, hollow crack filled the room. An excruciating, blinding pain tore through my skull. The room spun wildly, and everything faded to black. I collapsed onto the hardwood floor. A hot, thick liquid began pouring from the top of my head, trailing down my forehead, blinding my right eye, and dripping onto the floorboards. I clutched my head, my fingers were instantly soaked in blood. My chest heaved weakly. Kevin rushed over and roughly rolled me onto my back. He shoved his hand into the inner pocket of the cardigan I was wearing and pulled out the tiny brass key. His face lit up with a despicable, triumphant grin. "Found it, Mom." The stubborn bitch hid it in her pocket. "Open it, hurry." "Leave her, she's not going to die from a little cut." Once we have the goods, we'll bandage her up and tell everyone she slipped and fell. Hurry up! They completely ignored my convulsing, bleeding body. They turned their backs, rushing to the closet safe. The metallic clicks of the lock turning sounded like a countdown to my death. I lay in a pool of my own blood, my tears mixing with it. My heart was crushed by despair. I realized that, when people are blinded by greed, they are more ruthless than any wild beast. The exact moment the safe door clicked open, the roaring thunder outside was entirely eclipsed by a different, far more terrifying sound. Smash! The front door of the bedroom, already damaged from their break-in, was kicked with such monstrous force that it ripped off its hinges and slammed into the drywall. Margaret and Kevin jumped out of their skin, dropping the key. They whipped their heads around. Standing in the doorway was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black trench coat, dripping wet from the rain. A travel suitcase was left abandoned in the hallway. He stood silhouetted against the light, but the murderous aura radiating from him made the temperature in the room plummet to freezing. His chest heaved. His hands were clenched into fists, veins bulging. His bloodshot eyes widened in horror and absolute rage as he took in the chaotic room, the open safe, the bloody crystal decanter, and my battered, bleeding body on the floor. It was David. My husband. He wasn't in London. He was home. Duh. David. Help me. I rasped through blood-stained lips, reaching a weak, trembling hand toward him before my consciousness finally gave out. David didn't say a single word. His face distorted with an apocalyptic fury. He launched himself into the room like a thunderbolt. Before Kevin could even register what was happening or open his mouth to explain, David grabbed him by the throat, hoisting him off the ground. Bam! Bam! Two devastating, bone-crushing punches, carrying the full weight of a man pushed beyond the brink of sanity, slammed directly into Kevin's face. Kevin was thrown backward, crashing into the wardrobe. He spat out a mouthful of blood and collapsed to the floor, completely incapacitated. David! David, what are you doing? Why are you hitting your brother? Weren't you supposed to be back next month? Margaret stammered, backing into a corner. Her face was deathly pale, her hands shaking as she tried to placate him. I was just taking back what belongs to this family. Sarah is a thief, she was hiding money. David slowly turned around. The way he looked at his own mother held absolutely no respect, no familial love. It was a look of utter disgust, volcanic rage, and agonizing regret. Shut your mouth. You are absolute animals. Look at my wife, he roared, his voice cracking with anguish. Look at what you did in my own house. You beat my wife until she bled out over money? She slipped and fell. I didn't hit her. David, you have to believe your mother. I gave birth to you. Are you going to believe her over your own flesh and blood? David unleashed a primal scream, pointing a shaking finger toward the front door. Every word he spoke was like a blade, severing the ties of blood forever. I do not have a mother who is a monster. I do not have a brother who is an armed robber. From this second on, you are dead to me. Get out of my house. Get the hell out right now, before I call the cops and have you both thrown in prison for attempted murder. Get out. Lying on the floor, my mind faded to black. The very last thing I felt before the darkness swallowed me was a pair of strong, trembling, warm arms gathering me up. David's arms. His hot tears fell onto my freezing cheek. His arrival had saved my life, and it was the first strike of punishment against the demons disguised as family. The sharp, sterile smell of the hospital hit my nose. That was the first thing that pulled me from the deep void. The bright fluorescent lights above made my eyes ache. It took a long time to pry my heavy eyelids open. A throbbing, agonizing pain immediately radiated from the top of my head, like thousands of needles piercing through a thick layer of gauze. I shifted slightly and realized I was in the ER. The rhythmic beep-beep of a heart monitor echoed in the room. My right hand was being held tightly in a familiar, calloused, yet incredibly safe grip. I slowly turned my head. Sitting by the edge of the bed, David had his head bowed. His broad shoulders were shaking violently with every ragged breath. His wet trench coat was gone. He was wearing a wrinkled white dress shirt, and the collar and chest were stained with dark, dried blood. My blood. His hair was a mess of sweat and rain. The man who was always so calm. The resilient executive who handled corporate crises without blinking. Was sobbing like a child who had almost lost his entire world. I managed to move my fingers, gently stroking his hair. Feeling my weak movement, David snapped his head up. His eyes were bloodshot and swollen, filled with exhaustion and lingering panic. Seeing me awake, his lips trembled. Hot tears streamed down his sharp jawline and splashed onto the back of my hand. "Sarah, you're awake. Don't move," he whispered frantically. "The doctor said you have a concussion. 6 stitches. Do you feel nauseous? Does it hurt a lot? Let me hit the call button." "I'm okay. Don't call them. I just want to look at you for a minute," I rasped, my throat feeling like sandpaper. David hurriedly poured a cup of warm water and used a small spoon to carefully wet my cracked lips. His hands were shaking so badly that water spilled over the edges. He put the cup down and suddenly dropped to his knees right beside my bed. He took my face in both his hands and pressed his forehead against mine. His sobs broke the quiet of the hospital room. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. God, I am so sorry. I am a terrible husband. I'm a useless man. I thought letting my mom and brother stay with you would keep you company while I was away. I was stupid enough to believe in family, to believe the moral act they put on for me. If my flight had been delayed, if I hadn't come home early, I don't know how I could have lived the rest of my life. I almost lost you because of my own family." Looking at my husband's tears, my heart ached. The frustration I had bottled up for the 6 years of our marriage, the physical agony of the crystal decanter smashing into my skull, all of it seemed to be soothed by the profound remorse of the man I loved. I had blamed him before. I blamed him for being too lenient with his family, for letting his toxic mother walk all over us out of a sense of obligation. But seeing him now, wanting to tear himself apart from guilt, I knew his breaking point had finally been reached. David suddenly pulled back and violently slapped his own face twice. "This is the price of my cowardice," he spat at himself. For years, I thought biting my tongue and working myself to the bone to pay off Kevin's endless debts was just doing the right thing. I forced you to suffer along with me. I made you a victim of my own family's toxicity. But tonight, when I saw that pool of blood, when I saw her holding that bloody decanter, I realized I don't have a mother. I don't have a brother. They are monsters. They are heartless parasites. Don't do that. It wasn't your fault. It's their greed," I whispered. David grabbed my hands and pressed them against his chest. His eyes no longer held any weakness or panic. They gleamed with a cold, terrifyingly absolute resolve. It was the look of a man whose heart had completely died toward his blood relatives. "Listen to me, Sarah. From the moment I carried you out of that house, the only family I have left in this world is you. They personally severed the last tie. They trampled on my forgiveness. So, now, I am going to use my own 2 hands to cut out this cancer. I swear to you, I will never let you shed another tear or suffer another scratch from them. Whoever made you bleed will pay 100 times over." Hearing David's vow, I closed my eyes. A single tear of pure relief rolled down my cheek. The darkest period was finally over. The physical pain I was enduring was nothing compared to the liberation of my soul. My husband had finally woken up from the nightmare of familial obligation. Tonight's trauma was a horrific price to pay, but for his absolute awakening, it was worth it. In this war, I was no longer fighting alone. By morning, David went out into the hallway to fill out the admission paperwork and get me some hot soup. Left alone in the quiet room, I stared at the IV dripping steadily. My head throbbed, bringing back memories of the bitter 6 years I'd endured. The Sterling family wasn't impoverished, but they were morally bankrupt. From the day we got married, Margaret established an unspoken rule. David was the eldest son, the breadwinner, and therefore, everything he earned belonged to the family specifically, to fund Kevin. Kevin was 5 years younger, the golden child, spoiled rotten. He dropped out of college, spent his days drinking, gambling on sports, and dreaming of getting rich overnight. Every few months, Kevin would drown in debt. Sometimes it was sports betting, sometimes crypto scams, sometimes pawning leased cars. And every time, Margaret would show up at our door, sobbing hysterically, threatening to kill herself if David didn't clean up his brother's mess. I still vividly remembered our second year of marriage. We ate ramen for months, driving a beat-up car with failing brakes, just to save up the down payment for our first condo. The very day David was supposed to wire the down payment, debt collectors showed up at our apartment. Covered in tattoos, carrying baseball bats, they threw red paint all over our door. Kevin owed $15,000 to illegal bookies. Margaret flew in from Pennsylvania, dropping to her knees in front of David, crying her eyes out. "David, please. Blood is thicker than water." Kevin was just naive, his friends tricked him. "If you don't save him, they'll break his legs. You're his big brother. You can buy a house later, but you only have one brother. If he dies, I'll throw myself in front of a truck." David, plagued by a deeply ingrained guilt complex, caved. Our house down payment vanished into Kevin's gambling debts. I cried until I had no tears left, almost handing him divorce papers. But David begged for forgiveness, swearing it was the last time. He said he couldn't watch his mother kill herself. I loved him, so I gritted my teeth and started over from zero. But our sacrifices didn't make Kevin wake up, it only turned us into a bottomless ATM in their eyes. The tipping point was my inheritance. The antique diamonds and bonds weren't just money. They were the life savings of my parents. Hardworking middle-class folks who budgeted their whole lives. The day I got married, my mom pulled out that lockbox. "Sarah, we don't have much wealth to give you," my mom had said, holding my hands. "But we've been saving this since you were born. Keep it as your safety net." Life as a married woman is unpredictable. If things are good, great. But if you ever get sick, or if your marriage hits a wall, you have this to fall back on. You won't have to beg anyone, or swallow your pride. Remember, no matter what happens, never sell this to please others. Protect your dignity. For 6 years, even when David and I were broke and borrowing money for groceries, I never touched it. Yet, those monsters dared to covet the literal blood and sweat of my parents to pay off a deadbeat's gambling debts? I would have died before handing it over. Lying in the hospital bed, a cold smile touched my lips. "Margaret. Kevin. You thought breaking my head open meant you could just walk away with my money? No. The price you pay for my blood will cost you the rest of your lives." 10 days later, I was officially discharged. The doctor removed the heavy bandages, replacing them with a lighter gauze pad, revealing a long scar healing on my scalp. Looking in the mirror, I saw a pale, thin woman, but her eyes were brilliantly bright and eerily calm. This scar wasn't a mark of shame, it was my bloody medal of survival. David gently helped me into the Uber to head back to our townhouse. Since he had kicked his mother and brother out, the house had returned to its peaceful state. No more passive-aggressive comments from Margaret. No more messes from Kevin. However, the storm wasn't over. When wicked people are backed into a corner, they don't apologize, they resort to the most despicable tactics. And the ultimate weapon of toxic in-laws in this country is weaponizing the extended family and community gossip to destroy the daughter-in-law. Since my second day in the hospital, David's phone had been ringing off the hook. At first, he answered, but his jaw would instantly lock, his face would darken, and he'd hang up. Eventually, he put his phone on silent. But the text messages from his uncles, aunts, and the entire extended Sterling family back in rural Pennsylvania flooded his screen. I could see the vicious, judgmental words clearly. They called David an ungrateful bastard, whipped by his wife, abandoning his own mother. They accused me of brainwashing him. It turned out that after being thrown out into the Seattle storm, Margaret and Kevin didn't go far. They booked the first flight back to Pennsylvania. The very next morning, Margaret staged an Oscar-worthy performance in the main living room of the Sterling family estate. According to David's cousin, who called to warn him, Margaret had collapsed onto the floor, weeping and screaming to the heavens. She spun a venomous, perfectly crafted lie. She told the whole town that I was a deceitful, gold-digging whore who was secretly siphoning David's money to funnel back to my own family. She claimed she had only stumbled upon my secret stash and tried to counsel me on being a good wife. In response, she claimed I had cursed her out, violently attacked her, and then intentionally thrown myself against a table edge to frame her for assault. The climax of her lie was that I forced David to choose between me and his mother, threatening him with divorce and taking half his assets if he didn't throw them out into the storm. Kevin, of course, played the role of the devoted son who got beaten black and blue by his brother while trying to protect their mother. Rural communities are notoriously protective of their own bloodlines. Fueled by Margaret's crocodile tears and Kevin's bruised face, the entire Sterling extended family exploded. From Uncle Richard, the wealthy family patriarch, to Aunt Brenda, the town gossip, everyone aimed their pitchforks at me. They demanded a family intervention. They ordered David to bring me back to Pennsylvania to face judgment, demanding I get on my knees, apologize to his mother, and surrender the stolen assets to a family trust. If he refused, Uncle Richard threatened to disinherit David completely and excommunicate him from the family. Reading those texts, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I actually found it hilarious. The cheap family bond built on lies and mob mentality, they only listened to one side. They used their antiquated, patriarchal moral high ground to judge a woman without knowing the bloody truth. David sat next to me on the sofa, gripping his phone so hard his knuckles popped. He didn't hide anything from me. He showed me every vile message. I gently touched his tense hand. Your family is putting a lot of pressure on you, aren't they? They want us to fly back for a trial. They want you to divorce me or force me to surrender my inheritance. If you avoid them, you'll be branded a traitor to the family forever. David turned to me. There was no hesitation in his eyes. He gently stroked my hair, carefully avoiding my scar. I'm not avoiding them. Avoiding them is what guilty people do. We did nothing wrong. They want a family trial? Fine. I'll give them a trial. Sarah, do you have the strength to fly to Pennsylvania with me? I don't want to leave you alone, and I want you to be the one who delivers the final blow to these people trying to destroy your name. I nodded, my spine straight. I'll go. The wound on my head is healing, but the wound in my soul needs to be surgically removed. Let's go. Let's show them exactly what kind of morality Margaret is preaching. That night, I packed light. But the most important thing I placed in my carry-on bag wasn't my diamonds. It was my laptop and a flash drive containing a blockbuster movie they were all about to watch. The storm wasn't in Seattle anymore. The hurricane was about to hit that quiet Pennsylvania farm town and rip the masks off the monsters hiding behind the curtain of family. Our rental car rolled up the long gravel driveway leading to the Sterling family estate. It was a weekend, and thanks to Margaret's relentless campaigning, the air was thick with morbid curiosity and malice. As the car parked in the sprawling front yard, I could already feel dozens of eyes locked onto me. The yard and wraparound porch were packed. The older uncles and aunts sat rigidly on patio chairs, while the cousins clustered in groups, whispering loudly. The sound of their gossiping buzzed like a hive of angry hornets. When David stepped out of the car, walked around, and carefully helped me out, the entire yard went dead silent. The silence was heavy as lead. Judgmental eyes scanned me from head to toe. They stared pointedly at the medical gauze on my forehead, but there was no pity. In their eyes, my wound was self-inflicted, the karma I deserved for abusing my mother-in-law. Aunt Brenda, the loudest mouth in the family, stood on the porch steps and deliberately spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. Look at her, playing the frail victim. Strutting around like she owns the place. She probably came to put on a show and manipulate the elders. Any woman who forces her husband to kick his own mother out into the streets deserves to be struck by lightning. David froze. His hand, holding mine, tightened until it ached. He snapped his head toward her. The normally polite David shot her a glare so murderous, so filled with dark intent, that Aunt Brenda physically flinched, stepping back behind her husband and shutting her mouth. David didn't engage the peanut gallery. He knew exactly what the objective was today. He pulled me along. His strides long and unwavering, marching straight through the crowd and into the massive main living room of the estate. I walked beside him, my head held high. I was not the guilty party. I had no reason to bow my head. Inside, the room felt stifling. Sitting in the center leather armchair was Uncle Richard, the undisputed patriarch of the Sterling family. Flanking him were other senior relatives, all glaring at us over their cups of coffee. But right at the foot of Uncle Richard's chair was the most ridiculous, pathetic sight I had ever witnessed. Margaret was sitting on the floor rug. She had intentionally messed up her hair to look disheveled. She was wearing faded, frumpy clothes to look destitute. She dabbed at her reddened eyes with a tissue, letting out theatrical sobs. Standing next to her was Kevin. Gone were his designer clothes, he wore a faded t-shirt, his head bowed, looking like the helpless, devoted son, utterly devastated by his family's tragedy. It was a flawless performance. As we crossed the threshold, the room froze. Uncle Richard cleared his throat and slammed his coffee mug down on the end table with a loud thwack. He glared at David, then at me with undisguised contempt. "David, you actually have the nerve to show your face here?" Uncle Richard's booming voice echoed off the high ceilings. No Sterling man has ever been so whipped by an outsider that he'd throw his own mother and brother out into a storm. "We paid for your education, and you let this woman trample over our family values. Today, in front of the elders, you will set this straight. If you can't control your wife, the family will teach her a lesson. If you stubbornly protect her, consider yourself out of the will and out of this family. We don't breed ungrateful traitors." Nods of approval rippled through the room. They had anointed themselves judges, juries, and executioners. I stood perfectly still. My heartbeat was incredibly calm. I wasn't panicked. I looked at David. He stood tall, like a pine tree in a blizzard. He didn't cower before the threat of disinheritance. He slowly let go of my hand, took a half step forward, and used his broad back to shield me from their hostile glares. He looked Uncle Richard dead in the eye, his voice calm, resonant, and razor-sharp. "I brought my wife here today to show everyone the exact truth. I'm not running from anything, but before you pass your sentence, I want this family to ask the two people crying on the floor if they dare to repeat their story one more time, right to my face." David pointed a finger directly at Margaret and Kevin. The room held its breath. The real storm wasn't the family's yelling, it was the terrifying composure of a man who had survived the ultimate betrayal of his own blood. Spurred by the supportive stares of the relatives, Margaret knew she couldn't back down. She had backed herself into a corner. She let out a wailing cry and beat her chest with her fists. "God up in heaven. Everyone, look at the way he treats me," Margaret shrieked, crawling closer to Uncle Richard's chair. "I gave birth to him, I raised him, and now he brings the succubus into his house. She manipulated him into stealing my dignity. I have nothing left to live for. I should just end it right now so I don't have to look at them." She made a pathetic lunge toward the stone fireplace as if to bash her head against it. Kevin, right on cue, grabbed her, crying with her. "Mom, don't. Please. What will I do without you? David is brainwashed, Mom. Everyone, you don't know the truth." That night during the storm, Sarah had 20 grand in cash and diamonds hidden away. Mom just asked her to help the family during a crisis, and Sarah cursed her out. She tried to attack Mom. I stepped in to block her, and she slipped and hit her head on the table. When David got home, she lied and said we tried to murder her. He beat me half to death and threw us out. Kevin pulled down the collar of his t-shirt, revealing the dark purple bruises on his chest and shoulder, the marks from David's furious punches. That was all the family needed to see. The crowd erupted. The whispers turned into outright verbal abuse hurled at me. "You venomous snake," Aunt Brenda yelled, pointing at me. Hiding secret money to send to your own parents? God forbid you help your husband's family. Claiming abuse? Making a brother attack his own brother? Divorce her, David. You only get one mother. Uncle Richard slammed his hand on the armrest, silencing the room. He delivered his ultimatum. You hear that, David? This family will not tolerate a vicious, manipulative woman. A wife is supposed to build a home, not destroy it. The terms are simple. 1. You sign divorce papers today and kick her to the curb. 2. If you're still brainwashed, she gets on her knees right now, begs your mother for forgiveness, and hands over that secret money to the family trust to make amends and help Kevin's business. From now on, your mother manages your finances. As soon as he finished, Margaret, still looking down, let a brief, victorious smirk flash across her face before hiding it behind her tissue. They staged this entire intervention for one singular purpose: to force me to hand over my inheritance. Using the pressure of the community to legitimize armed robbery under the guise of making amends. The sheer hypocrisy made me sick to my stomach. David remained perfectly still, he didn't argue. He let them hurl their insults, let Uncle Richard pass his judgment, and let his mother and brother act out their tragedy. But standing next to him, I could feel the absolute sub-zero temperature radiating from his body. His silence wasn't submission, it was the countdown of a ticking time bomb. David slowly turned to me and gave a single nod. It was the signal. I took a deep breath. I calmly slipped off my backpack. Ignoring the dozens of shocked stares, I walked right past them over to the massive 8.5-inch flat-screen TV mounted on the living room wall. I pulled out my laptop, plugged it into an outlet, and connected the HDMI cable from my laptop directly to the TV. The room buzzed with confusion. Aunt Brenda yelled, "What the hell do you think you're doing, making a scene in this house?" But David stepped in front of the TV, raising his hand to demand silence. "You've all made your judgments," David declared. "You've heard my mother and brother's testimony. Now, I am presenting my wife's defense. But she doesn't need to speak. The video and audio will show you exactly how she slipped and fell that night." I inserted the flash drive. A cold smile spread across my face as I looked directly at Margaret and Kevin. Their eyes were beginning to widen in sheer, unadulterated panic. "You wanted a show? Fine. Today, I'm premiering a raw, unedited horror film. And I'm the director." I hit the enter key. The massive TV screen flared to life. The camera angle was from high above, capturing the entirety of our Seattle master bedroom. The night vision mode displayed a crisp, high-definition black and white feed. The first sound to blast through the home theater speakers was the violent pounding of the rain, then, the unmistakable click-clack of metal picking a lock. The entire living room stopped breathing. On screen, the door burst open. 2 figures stormed in. Everyone immediately recognized them. "Where's the key? Where are you hiding it? Give it to me." Margaret's shrill, demonic scream echoed from the TV, hitting the ears of every elder in the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Suspicious, horrified glances shot toward Margaret, who was still sitting on the rug. She began to violently shake, her hands gripping her pants. The video continued at a terrifying pace. The giant Kevin lunged forward, violently twisting my arms behind my back. The sight of a grown man using brute force to pin down a small woman made Aunt Brenda's jaw drop. My desperate screams for help were drowned out by Margaret's vile curses. "Slap her, shut her up. Search her thoroughly. SMA." The sound of Kevin striking my face made the hair on the back of everyone's neck stand up. But what absolutely paralyzed the Sterling family, what sucked the oxygen entirely out of the room, was the next moment. As I struggled and broke free, running for the door, Margaret grabbed the solid crystal decanter. Without a second of hesitation, without an ounce of mercy, she swung it down directly onto the back of my skull. Thud. The sickening sound blasted through the speakers. On screen, I collapsed to the floor. Dark blood poured over my face and pooled on the hardwood. A collective scream of horror erupted from the women in the room. Several covered their mouths in terror. But the cruelty was, "Open it, hurry. Leave her, she's not going to die from a little cut. Once we have the goods, we'll bandage her up and tell everyone she slipped and fell. Hurry up." Every single cold-blooded word from Margaret's mouth personally shattered the innocent victim act she had put on that morning. Her lies about me hitting my own head, about counseling me, about my disrespect, all of it was stripped away, exposing an atrocity so grotesque it was indefensible. They completely ignored a woman bleeding out on the floor, obsessed only with cracking open a safe. The video ended with David kicking the door down, knocking Kevin to the floor, and screaming at them to get out. I hit pause. The final image frozen on the 8.5-inch screen was my blood-soaked face and the massive pool of blood on the floor. The silence in the estate was absolute. You could hear people gulping for air. No one dared to speak. The eyes that had been glaring at me like daggers just minutes ago now collectively snapped toward Margaret and Kevin. I closed my laptop. The click broke the silence. I stepped forward, looking at the pale, shell-shocked faces of my in-laws. "Before anyone asks," I said, my voice steady, "I bought a hidden nanny cam disguised as an alarm clock because things had been going missing from our bedroom since they moved in. I just wanted to catch a petty thief. I never imagined it would capture an attempted murder." I looked at Uncle Richard. Uncle Richard. Everyone. The truth is right there. The woman you just called a manipulative snake is the woman who almost died at the hands of your own flesh and blood. That money was my parents' life savings. I would die before giving it to a gambling addict. They couldn't bully me into it, so they resorted to armed robbery. I was bleeding out on the floor, and they came back here to tell you I faked it. If I didn't have this camera, wouldn't you have drowned me in false accusations today? This. Uncle Richard stammered, his face turning a furious shade of purple. He stood up, his fingers shaking as he pointed at Margaret. "Margaret! Kevin! What is the meaning of this? You committed armed robbery against your own daughter-in-law? And you came back here crying, lying to this entire family?" The humiliation of being played for fools by these two made the elders seethe with rage. Margaret couldn't cry anymore. She sat paralyzed on the rug, her whole body convulsing, her face drained of all blood. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Kevin was so terrified his legs gave out. He started crawling toward the side door, trying to escape. But David was faster. He stepped right into Kevin's path, blocking him. David's eyes no longer held explosive rage. They held absolute, pure disgust. The video was just the opening act. The final blow to sever these ties was still in David's hand. The crowd's fury exploded. The insults that had been hurled at me were now redirected entirely at Margaret and Kevin. Aunt Brenda, flipping sides in an instant, pointed her finger at Margaret and screeched, "You disgusting sociopath. What kind of mother-in-law tries to bash a girl's head in for money? I have lived my whole life and never seen a woman as wicked as you. And you, Kevin, a grown man beating up a defenseless woman? You've dragged the Sterling family name through the mud." Margaret buried her face in her hands and started to wail, not the fake, manipulative cries from earlier, but the genuine, panicked shrieks of a villain backed into a corner with her mask ripped off. She knew she had lost everything. She had lost the family's backing, the moral high ground she clung to. She crawled on her knees toward David, clasping her hands, resorting to her ultimate weapon, a mother's guilt trip. "David, I was wrong," she sobbed. "I was blinded by the money. But I am still your mother. Kevin is still your brother. Please, look past this. Have mercy on the woman who gave birth to you. Tell them to forgive me. I promise I'll never touch Sarah again. David, save me." Her pleas were so sickeningly fake I wanted to vomit. She accidentally bashed my head in with solid crystal? Her shamelessness had no limits. I clenched my fists, waiting for David's reaction. I knew he was done, but standing in front of his entire family, watching his own mother beg on her knees. Would that toxic guilt drag him back in? David didn't reach down to help her up. He stood like a statue, glaring down at the woman at his feet. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, stapled together. With a violent flick of his wrist, he slammed the stack down onto the coffee table right in front of Uncle Richard. The papers scattered everywhere. "Look at them," David commanded, his voice cutting through Margaret's wailing. "Look at what blood is thicker than water actually costs." Uncle Richard picked up a page. The others grabbed the scattered sheets. They were bank statements, wire transfers, payday loan payoffs, and receipts from underground bookies. All of them paid by David, sent to shady LLCs and collection agencies. 7 years, David's voice echoed with years of repressed agony. For 7 years since I started my career, and 6 years since I married my wife, I haven't lived a single day for myself. 15 grand for sports betting in 2018. 40 grand for high-interest loan sharks in 2020. And recently, 30 grand to cover Kevin's fake crypto startup. David pointed a finger straight at Margaret's face. Every single dime was the blood, sweat, and tears of me and my wife. Working ourselves into the ground to pay off the debts of this degenerate. My wife was sick, and we ate ramen to save money just so I could fulfill this idiotic family duty you forced on me. You used my guilt. You used my late father's memory to chain me to this parasite. The family was stunned. They all thought David lived a life of luxury as a tech executive in Seattle. No one knew that behind the success was a mother bleeding him dry. I compromised. I tried to be a good son, David continued. And what did I get? Our sacrifices only fed your bottomless greed, to the point where you tried to murder my wife just to steal her last bit of security. You are worse than animals. David, what are you saying? Kevin cried from the floor. I'm your brother. You're rich, you helping me out is nothing to you. Shut up. David roared. You have no right to call me your brother. You are a 30-year-old man who does nothing but leech, gamble, and lie. Today, in front of the Sterling family, I am making this absolutely clear. David took a step back, spreading his arms, his voice ringing out like a solemn oath. From this exact second, I am legally, financially, and emotionally cutting off Margaret and Kevin Sterling. I will never give these two people another red cent. I will never answer another call about their debts or their lives. If anyone here wants to call me a traitor, fine. If you want to cut me out of the will, I'll walk out myself. But I will never let my wife suffer or bleed another drop for these scumbags ever again. David's declaration fell like the blade of a guillotine, severing the final tether. Hearing this, Margaret's eyes rolled back in her head, and she fainted dead away onto the rug. But ironically, not a single relative rushed forward to catch her or call for a doctor. They looked at the mother and son with pure revulsion, stepping away as if they were infected with the plague. No one wanted to be associated with thieves and attempted murderers disowned by their own son. I stood beside David and grabbed his hand tightly. We had won this war. Not with violence, but with the brutal truth and the courage to amputate a rotting limb. The atmosphere in the estate was suffocating. Margaret lay spread eagle on the floor, drifting in and out of consciousness. Kevin was curled in a corner, sweating bullets. They had lost their primary source of income, their reputation, and were now exiles in their own family. Uncle Richard waved his hand, signaling a few younger cousins to drag Margaret and Kevin outside to the porch. He didn't want their presence polluting the house any longer. David and I intertwined our fingers, ready to leave. It was over. The jury of public opinion had delivered its verdict. But it seemed the universe felt this punishment wasn't quite severe enough for people whose greed knew no bounds. Karma wasn't just coming in the form of social exile, it was pulling up in the flesh, carrying weapons. Screech! The screeching of tires burning rubber on the gravel driveway shattered the quiet. 3 black, heavily tinted SUVs violently swerved onto the lawn, blocking the exit. The entire family jumped, rushing to the windows and the porch. Out of the SUVs stepped nearly a dozen heavily tattooed, massive men. They wore tight black shirts, their arms covered in ink. Some held aluminum baseball bats, others held heavy metal pipes. The murderous Aggressive aura of professional cartel debt collectors radiated from them. They kicked open the decorative wooden gate of the estate and marched onto the lawn like they owned the place. "Where's Kevin? Where is that little scar-faced bitch and his mother?" The lead thug, a massive, bald man named Marcus, roared. "Your time was up 3 days ago. How long did you think you could hide in this hick town?" His booming, threatening voice terrified the rural relatives. The aunts and cousins screamed, backing up against the walls. The elder uncles, who just moments ago were acting tough, went pale and shrunk into the background. Nobody dared to intervene. David instinctively pulled me behind his back, shielding me from the thug's line of sight. Kevin, shivering on the porch, locked eyes with Marcus. His eyes bulged in pure terror. He actually wet his pants right there, trying to scramble under a patio table to hide. But there was no escaping professional enforcers. "There you are, you little rat." Marcus sneered. "Thought you could run back to mommy to dodge my money? Drag him out." 2 thugs lunged forward, dragging Kevin by his ankles out from under the table and tossing him violently onto the gravel driveway. Marcus walked up and slammed his steel-toed boot straight into Kevin's ribs. Kevin shrieked in agony. Margaret, who was faking her fainting spell, snapped awake at the sound of her son's scream. She scrambled across the porch, throwing herself at Marcus's feet, wailing, "Please! Please don't hurt him. What did he do? If you kill him, how will I live?" "Shut your mouth, lady." Marcus barked. "Your degenerate son took a massive sports betting loan from my boss. Here's the paperwork." Marcus pulled a plastic-wrapped document from his jacket and threw it at Margaret's face. It was covered in red ink signatures. "Look closely, lady. $80,000. He borrowed it to gamble on offshore parlays, promised to pay the principal and vig by last Friday. He swore he was gonna break into his sister-in-law's safe in Seattle to get the cash to pay us. Then he goes ghost. We had to track his phone's GPS to find this farm. Where are the diamonds, kid? You trying to screw us?" Hearing the thug's words, a jolt went through my spine. The entire estate went dead silent again. All eyes shot back to David and me. Sickening truth was laid bare. The excuse about importing electronics, the business venture they used to demand my inheritance, it was all a complete lie. They knew Kevin was being hunted by the mob. And to save the life of her degenerate son, Margaret happily offered up her daughter-in-law as a sacrificial lamb. She was willing to smash my skull in and steal my parents' life savings just to hand it over to loan sharks to cover an $80,000 gambling debt. I looked down at Margaret, who was trembling like a leaf, her face white as a sheet. A wave of profound disgust washed over me. What a terrifying, twisted version of motherly love. She loved her son, but what about my life? What about my parents' sweat and tears? To her, I was nothing but a walking ATM to be slaughtered for cash. My anger evaporated, replaced by a chilling sense of vindication. Karma is real. What goes around comes around. They had pushed me to the brink of death. And now the black hole of debt they created was swallowing them whole, leaving no way out. The driveway of the Sterling estate had turned into an execution block. The smell of the thug's cheap cologne and the stench of Kevin's fear choked the air. Marcus spat on the ground. "We didn't drive across the country to listen to you cry. Our rules are simple. You borrow, you pay. You owe money, you pay with money. You can't pay with money, you pay in blood. 80 grand. Overdue by 3 days. With the penalty fees, it's 100 grand now. You either hand over the cash today, or I'm taking one of his hands back with me, as a down payment. Choose." A thug beside Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a massive, gleaming meat cleaver. The metallic shing made the Sterling family lose their minds. Women screamed and covered their faces. The elders cowered. In this quiet Pennsylvania town, facing down armed cartel enforcers was an unimaginable nightmare. "No. Please, God, no." Kevin shrieked, thrashing wildly as 2 massive men pinned his arms to the gravel. "Mom, save me! I don't want to lose my hand. Mom, Tell David to pay it. David has money. Tell him to save me. Even with a cleaver inches from his wrist, his selfish, parasitic nature didn't change. He still blindly demanded his older brother fix his fatal mistakes. Hearing her son scream, Margaret lost her mind. Ignoring the gleaming blades, she crawled across the gravel, turning her desperate eyes toward David and me. She knew the entire extended family had locked their doors to her. No one was going to drop $100,000 to save a gambling addict. Her last, only hope was the son she had just driven away and the daughter-in-law she had tried to murder. David! David, please! Margaret sobbed, lunging forward and wrapping her arms around David's calves. I beg you. I'm begging you on my knees. Save your brother. They're going to chop his hand off. You have savings, right? Cash out your $401k. I swear I'll make him work like a dog to pay you back. He's your blood, you can't just watch him die. She cried until her voice gave out, her forehead banging against the gravel until it bled. But what made me want to throw up, what truly disgusted me, was that even as she begged for her son's life, her eyes darted greedily toward the backpack I was holding. Sarah! Sarah! I'm sorry, she wailed. I'm an animal. I'm not human. But please, have mercy. Sell the diamonds. Sell your bonds. Give me the money to pay them off, and whatever is short, David can cover. Money is just material things. What does it matter when his life is on the line? Please, be the bigger person, save him just this once. I stood absolutely frozen. The sheer audacity, the bottomless shamelessness of this woman made the world spin. They had just kicked my door down, beaten me bloody, and tried to rob my safe to pay this exact debt. They failed, got exposed, got disowned. And now, kneeling at my feet, she actually had the nerve to say, money is just material things, and beg me to willingly hand it over? To her, my parents' lives, my safety, my future meant absolutely nothing compared to her son's gambling debts. Her evil wasn't just in her violence, it was in her supreme entitlement, her belief that she had the right to consume other people's lives for her own benefit. David looked down at the woman gripping his legs. His chest rose and fell slowly. There was no pity. No pain. His eyes were entirely hollow, dead, and cold as a frozen lake. His despair had reached its absolute limit, transforming into total apathy. You're right. Money is material, David said, his voice flat but sharp enough to pierce Margaret's mind. But that inheritance is my wife's blood. It's her parents' tears. You and that piece of trash tried to murder her to steal it. So what gives you the right to demand she sell it to save his life? $100,000. Even if I had $20 million in my pocket right now, I would rather burn it to ash or throw it in the ocean than give a single cent to save his pathetic life. David looked down at her. I already disowned you. His debts and his life have nothing to do with me. You coddled him. You enabled him. Now you suffer the consequences. You own a farm and a house down the road, right? Sell your house. Sell your land. Save your precious golden child yourself. With a sudden, violent jerk, David kicked his legs free, throwing Margaret's hands off him. That single motion didn't just physically push her away, it permanently severed the toxic guilt that had chained him for 7 years. Margaret collapsed backward onto the gravel, her eyes glassy with ultimate despair. She finally realized that her eldest son, her ultimate safety net, had truly abandoned her. There were no more second chances. All doors were permanently shut. The sentence for her greed had been passed, with no chance of appeal. Let's go, Sarah. The air here is toxic, David said. He grabbed my hand, interlacing his fingers tightly with mine. He didn't spare a single glance at Kevin, who was screaming hysterically under the loan shark's knife. We turned our backs, walking with long, steady strides toward our rental car, leaving the driveway as it turned into a living hell. We left behind the agonizing screams of people who had sown the wind and were now reaping the whirlwind. Our car started up and backed out of the estate. Through the rearview mirror, I could still see the chaos on the lawn. It looked like a satirical painting of karmic justice, brutal and uncompromising. The engine hummed smoothly, but I could still hear the faint echoes behind us. Ah, God, please. Mom, help me. My hand. Murder. Help us. Uncle Richard, please help him. He's family. Margaret's desperate screams echoed through the country roads. She banged on the heavy wooden doors of the estate, begging her relatives for help. But the only response was silence. The heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate had been slammed shut and deadbolted from the inside. Not a single uncle or aunt stepped outside. No one dared to interfere with the cartel. They feared the thugs, yes, but more than that, they were utterly disgusted by Margaret and Kevin's true nature. When that video played, Margaret and Kevin dug their own graves. Now that the consequences had arrived, they were pariahs. I leaned back against the leather seat and closed my eyes. The last image I saw was Kevin being dragged by two tattooed thugs and thrown violently into the back of a black SUV. The sound of a baseball bat hitting flesh echoed, followed by Kevin's fading whimpers. They didn't chop his hand off right there, they were taking him. The mob would force Margaret to sign over the deed to her farm and house to cover the debt. $100,000, plus compounding interest, selling her rural property wouldn't even cover the half of it. From an arrogant mother-in-law who bragged about her entrepreneur son and plotted to steal my assets, Margaret was about to become a homeless beggar in her own hometown. She would spend her twilight years in poverty, agony, and the absolute contempt of her peers. If Kevin survived, he would be crippled, carrying a massive debt he could never repay. The deepest abyss for evil people isn't death. It's having to live long enough to watch everything they scheme to steal be ripped away from them, leaving them completely powerless, screaming to a sky that won't answer. I looked at David. He was focused on driving, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the open highway ahead. His face had regained its usual calm, but I knew the man beside me had just undergone a brutal psychological surgery. Cutting out a cancer named family is an agonizing decision, but it was vital. If he hadn't let go, if he had softened, that cancer would have spread and killed him, me, and our future children. The car was quiet. A soft instrumental song played on the radio, soothing the tension. I reached out and gently placed my hand over his on the center console. David turned his hand over, lacing his long fingers with mine, giving them a warm, reassuring squeeze. It's over, Sarah. From now on, no one will ever threaten or hurt you again, he promised, his voice full of sincerity. We're starting over. I'm going to make up for every piece of suffering you endured over the last 6 years. I smiled a true, peaceful smile from the bottom of my heart. Happy tears quietly slipped from my eyes. Yes, it was finally over. The 6-year nightmare was shattered by the dawn. We had walked through the most brutal storms of human greed, and there was no reason we couldn't build a brilliant, unbreakable future together. The wicked were left behind at the bottom of the abyss of their own making. We were driving toward the light, toward freedom, dignity, and a love forged in fire. 6 months after the earthquake in Pennsylvania, our lives had completely turned the page, vibrant and incredibly peaceful. The wound on my head had fully healed, leaving only a faint, thin scar hidden beneath my thick hair. Whenever I brushed my hair and traced that scar, I no longer felt fear or resentment. It was my warrior's medal, a permanent reminder of my survival, resilience, and the courage I found to fight for my dignity. Since cutting off Margaret and Kevin completely, our finances recovered at an astonishing rate. We no longer had to carry the burden of debts falling from the sky. Our money began to grow. David was promoted to regional director of his tech firm, doubling his salary. I decided to use a portion of the emergency bonds I had protected with my life to invest in opening a boutique, floral and home decor shop. A dream I had put on hold for 6 miserable years. Business was booming, the shop constantly bustling with customers. We sold the old townhouse, the one stained with dark memories and blood, and bought a beautiful, sunlit penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle. A living space filled with plants and absolute freedom. Occasionally, through old friends passing through town, I heard whispers about the people who tried to destroy me. Margaret's farm and house were seized by the loan sharks and sold at auction to cover Kevin's debt. But the sale didn't cover the interest. Kevin had been beaten so severely he was permanently crippled in one leg. Word was he had fled to the Canadian border, working under the table as a loader, living worse than a stray dog. Margaret, once the domineering, entitled matriarch, was now renting a dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of town. She spent her days collecting scrap metal and cans just to eat. Not a single relative offered her help or took her in. Her deceitful, thieving nature was too well known. The poverty, the humiliation, and the agony of being disowned by her eldest son was the life sentence karma had handed her. Hearing this, I only smiled gently. I didn't gloat. Nor did I pity her. Every person's life is the sum of their choices. You reap what you sow. That ancient truth has never been wrong. On a crisp Sunday morning in autumn, golden sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our penthouse, illuminating the white roses I had just arranged. David was puttering around in the open kitchen, making my favorite pancakes and bacon. The clatter of pans and the smell of coffee filled the air, bringing a profound sense of warmth and fulfillment I had always dreamed of. I stepped out onto the balcony, holding a small white plastic stick in my hand. My heart pounded against my ribs. An overwhelming surge of pure joy swelled in my chest. On the pregnancy test, 2 bold, red lines were clearly visible. A tiny new life had quietly come to us, the most miraculous gift from God after the storm had passed. I realized that when the human mind is unshackled from oppression and fear, when the soul is watered with peace and love, miracles naturally bloom. David carried 2 plates to the dining table. Seeing me standing frozen on the balcony, he wiped his hands on his apron and quickly walked over, wrapping his arms around me from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his voice warm. What is my beautiful wife daydreaming about out here? Come eat, babe, before it gets cold. I turned around, pressing my face against his solid chest, and slowly held up the pregnancy test in front of his face. David's eyes went wide. He froze for a few seconds. Then, he let out a shout of pure joy, picking me up and spinning me around in the air. The man who had cried tears of agony in the hospital was crying again, but this time, they were tears of absolute bliss. Having survived the chaos, the humiliation, and the very threshold of death, I realized a profound truth I want to pass on to every woman out there. Marriage is not a graveyard, but if you marry into a toxic family, blind submission is the knife that will kill you. As women, we must have our own financial safety net. We must know how to protect our dignity and our core values. Kindness is a precious gem, but never let it be exploited by parasites, using family as an excuse to bleed you dry. And most importantly, a woman's true happiness in marriage doesn't depend on how wealthy her in-laws are. It depends on the spine of the man standing next to her. A truly good husband isn't someone who never makes a mistake. He is a man who, when standing on the line between toxic blood ties and the life of his wife, has the courage to wake up. He is the man who will act as your shield, taking the brunt of the world's judgment to protect you from the very daggers thrown by his own relatives. The autumn sun filled the room, warming every corner. The storms had receded forever. From now on, in this home, there would only be love, mutual respect, and the pure, ringing laughter of a child. The dark night was over, and the most brilliant dawn had truly begun.